Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Community Partnerships in Action stream. Next up, we have Scott Elliott, who will be giving us a presentation which is titled Making Seagrass Sexy, which is enamoring, and I would love to hear how he achieves that. So without further ado, I will hand over to Scott. Thanks so much for being here, Scott.
Thank you, Lex, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Scott Elliott, and I'm the coordinator of the Yarram Landcare network based down here in not so sunny Victoria today. I'm extremely honoured and proud to be here and be part of the National Landcare Conference to share details of the Corner Inlet Broadleaf Seagrass Restoration Project. I'm speaking to you from Gunai country, which is in the heart of Gippsland. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. At the commencement of this presentation, I was given a lofty goal, and that is that I hope by the end of it, you'll agree with me that seagrass is indeed very sexy. So just before I get right in, I want to ensure we're all on the same page with respect to whereabouts we're operating. Corner Inlet lies to the east of Wilson's Promontory National Park, about 220 kilometres southeast of Victoria's capital, Melbourne. Corner Inlet itself is 600 square kilometres in size, and it's protected as a Ramsar site, according to the Nooramunga and Corner Inlet coastal parks. We're going to talk a little bit today about seagrass, in particular one species, which is known as Posidonia australis. More about that in a second. So, the Corner Inlet Broadleaf Seagrass Restoration Project is a long name for a world-first partnership which has emerged between the Yarram Landcare Network, the commercial fishing industry, and the 18 licence holders on Corner Inlet, in addition to marine biologists from UWA over in Western Australia, our own University of Melbourne, and supported by 50 Landcare volunteers from our network, in addition to a whole number of community groups. We aim to plant 200 hectares. Yes, you heard it right, 200 hectares of broadleaf seagrass over the next few years. We also are very grateful to the support we've received from Victoria's Department of Environment, in addition to the federal government under the National Landcare Program and the Fish Habitat Restoration Program, who have all provided funds to make this amazing project happen. So why do this project now? As we say there are implications for blue carbon, but in many ways, the genesis of the Broadleaf Seagrass Restoration Project has its beginnings many years ago with our Jack and Albert River Restoration Project. What makes the JAR project so special is that we've been focused on landscape scale restoration for two very short river systems, which rise up in the Strzelecki Ranges to the north, and both of them traverse less than about 50 kilometres as the crow flies before they reach the sea. In this case, they get to the estuary of the Albert River, which flows directly into Nooramunga, which, as we said, is a Ramsar listed site. It's vital habitat for the commercial fish which frequent Corner Inlet. And to give you some idea, about $2 million worth of commercial fish are produced in Corner Inlet each year, and the majority of that becomes table fish for some of Australia's best restaurants, including the Rockpool Dining Group, if you've ever eaten at a Neil Perry restaurant, or Josh Nyland, the fish butcher. He gets a lot of his fish from here on Corner Inlet, if you're a master chef aficionado such as myself. The JAR project achieved a lot of its prominence via the support of the Wetenhall Environment Trust. And a lot of the work we've done via JAR over the past few decades prior to me joining the role has been about revegetating the streams, excluding stock from riverways, and removing threats to weeds, removing threats in the form of weeds and animals. So in many ways, we understood that what happens on the land has a direct impact on Corner Inlet. So we took it to the next level, and we decided we'd directly address the loss of broadleaf seagrass. It's important to point out there's many threats to seagrass, including these guys which are pictured, which are a species of native urchin, which numbers absolutely exploded in recent times. They don't traditionally eat seagrass, but they got hungry and they were pushed, and the rest is unfortunately history. In the face of all of these threats, Landcare took it upon itself about 4 years ago here in Yarram to give it a go and head offshore. And I always say that what we're doing is like traditional Landcare in another form. The commercial fishermen's boats, just like the tractors, the pasture of the seagrass meadow, and the cattle and the sheep, that's the rock flathead which end up on your plate. So how do we go about doing this? This is pretty exciting stuff. So each year around mid to late December, oftentimes coinciding with Christmas, when the tidal conditions are right, the temperature is on song, and the moon is in its correct phase, the seagrass release a fruit pod, which is depicted here in the bottom right. These fruit pods float up to the surface of Corner Inlet. Under natural conditions, they would whop around and they form into rafts, literally like giant green oil slicks of 1 kilometre or so long. And over the course of some days, and in some cases weeks, the fruit pod opens and it drops out of it a little seed. If you've ever watched the David Attenborough documentary and you've seen like a mangrove fall down and sort of spike into the sand, it's a bit like that on a miniature scale. In our first iteration of the project, we collected the fruit from the top of the water, put it back into a big aquaculture tank, which we set up on shore, and allow the seedlings to drop out of the fruit. 3 years ago, we took that fruit and took the seedlings and put them straight into sandbags. And what you're looking at here is a picture from summer 2018-19. We filled around 90 of these sandbags with a mixture of sand, some of it bricky sand, if you've ever built concrete or done something like that. The rest of it was dredge spoil, which was churned up back in the 1970s when they added the new channel in Corner Inlet. The seedlings were planted into the bags, taken out by the commercial fishers' boats, and placed off the side into the bottom of Corner Inlet. Unfortunately, we learned 2 really key lessons in year 1, that being the quality of the sandbags we used wasn't up to scratch. It meant that the hessian that we got from the local hardware store, particularly the hessian that had interacted with the dredge spoil, the salt simply withered the sandbags away. And when we went back 3 months after deployment, there was in some cases, no sandbag hessian left, or in others, it had busted open and the seedlings had gone away with it. So we needed to rethink what we were doing. Enter the Sandbag Snake, as we like to call it. You can see here our project officer, Jason Pickering. He's busy filling one of those sandbags in question. We engaged the local upholstery business to craft these things for us. They're about 80 millimetres by 2 metres, and they come in at just under 20 kilos, which is a single person lift in OH&S terms. The hessian itself is the highest quality on offer, traditionally be on the bottom of antique pieces of furniture or chaise lounges or something like that. But most importantly, the reason we created and used these sandbag snakes is that it creates areas of slack water on the bottom of the ocean. So if you can imagine, what we're created is, in essence, an offshore version of direct seeding. These sandbags go in, we put them on the bottom of the water, and when we come back with the fruit, we can drop it over the top and they get caught in the little nooks and crannies, but also those areas where there's less tidal movement happening underwater. We did that in around spring. We dropped off the sandbags, and that gives it enough time to create, for lack of a better term, a bit of a microbiome in and around the sandbags. This is a picture of about 100 sandbags ready to go on the deck of one of the commercial fishers' barges that he uses for offshore work. It's important to point out the boats we use on Corner Inlet for commercial fishing aren't quite this big. We put down about 450 of these 2-metre sandbags per hectare. So you've got roughly 900 metres of surface area where they can catch the seedlings. Depending on the water depth, we either walk them straight off the boat, or we became very, very good at driving the barge in reverse and kind of depth charging them off as we went. Areas were established with GPS marks and put temporary buoys next to them, which guided the delivery of the snakes. The photo on the left shows us in with stakes, deploying the sandbags directly off the front of the barge. And at this stage, I'd really be keen to point out the fact that the technique has been so successful that our partners from the University of Western Australia have actually worked with the Mulgana people, whom are the traditional owners of Shark Bay, to adapt this exact approach for there. We've also had inquiries from as far afield as Tasmania and the United States to try and use this method, I guess, of creating slack water underneath the ocean to bring back other species of seagrass. Another thing worth pointing out is the whole inception of this idea really came about because it was noticed in Western Australia that on areas of rock wall in Shark Bay, those embankments were catching the Posidonia australis fruit, and then there was a heap of seed getting dropped there. So we're creating a micro version of that, where these small eddies will aid establishment. So here we can see some pictures of the seeds themselves on the left after they've dropped out, and on the right are our aquaria in action. In summer 2019-20, we were successful in collecting and dispersing 157,000 seeds, and that was across 8 sites in Corner Inlet. We set up the aquaria in an area known as Port Welch Pool, and the fishes are our eyes on the inlet. So as soon as the fruit hits the water, they collect it, and we also go out with them to grab it. Unfortunately, last year we got no fruit. So summer 2020, 2021, there was nothing. Anecdotally, this is the first time that this has happened since the mid-1970s. We're still trying to isolate what the cause of that was. The La Nina weather patterns, which persisted throughout 2020, were also common, or at least present, in the mid-1970s. So whilst the jury's still out why we got no fruit last year, the culprit in many circles and from ecologists working in the space of seagrass, the finger's definitely being pointed towards climate change. I also think I want to talk about how we got to the stage of restoring areas as well. It was a 3-stage process, and what you're looking at is stage 1. We hosted a town hall meeting with the commercial fishers, and some of them are 5th generation. So they've been doing this for over 150 years. It was very exciting to sit down with them with a map, with a texter, engage, ask them, where did the seagrass used to be? Where do you think it would succeed to put it back? Which areas won't interact with high effort fishing zones, where the recreational fishers target? What will succeed in terms of low tidal movement and good water clarity? So I bring your attention to the number 2, and I'll come to that in just a second. So the second stage in the process was a desktop analysis. So considering the location, presence of other meadows, looking back at historic photos. We did all of that work, and the on-water investigations came as the 3rd step. I think it's really important to say the number 2 we saw in the previous slide is actually depicted here. So we were able to put in 25,000 seedlings into that site and sandbags as well. So that's now been restored, that area, which is very exciting for us. And we can obviously report back to our partners, the fishers, that we have had success. And we've had runaway success in terms of this compared to other methods, particularly not using the sandbag snakes. We're looking at a rate of 200 to 300 times more success than what you would get. So it's a game of percentages. 157,000 seeds, only a matter of a few hundred of those will become mature plants. But that's not bad going when you consider that actually seagrass is like the old growth forests of the sea. We're pretty excited. I'll just jump to the next one. So there are implications for blue carbon and what we're doing as well. It's a relatively new term, blue carbon. So indulge me very quickly in saying what that involves. It refers to the carbon stored in coastal ecosystems and predominantly refers to mangrove, salt marsh, and most importantly, seagrass. The ecosystems store carbon from the atmosphere, and rather than locking it away for hundreds of years, they lock it away for thousands on near-on geologic timescales. So seagrasses such as Posidonia that we work with have a massively fibrous root system underneath, and they grow roots which are known as rhizomes that spread out along the ocean floor and into the sandy bottom underneath. Within the top 1 metre of soil over in Shark Bay, underneath the seagrass meadow, there's estimated to be 128 tonnes of carbon. So for every metre of rhizome you've got 128 tonnes locked up for thousands of years. We're working with Deakin University to figure out ways that we can actually quantify, well, how much is there in terms of carbon underneath these areas? What can we do by restoring it? Can we get money for carbon credits into the future? Could we also look at ways to protect meadows to generate carbon credits? At the minute, there's no policy settings at a federal level. However, there's a number of voluntary schemes that we're looking to work with, such as VERA, the Verified Carbon Standard, and various funds that have popped up as well with corporate groups who are interested in the blue carbon space. The next stage and final part of our project will involve scuba-based restoration. And for that, we'll be going out with scuba tanks and snorkels and taking parts of the leading edge of the meadow and then planting it out in a checkerboard pattern. And over the course of about 4 or 5 years, we'll see that accrete across the ocean floor to create a consistent meadow. So all in all, very exciting. I would say the value of input and partnerships that we've received, particularly from the commercial fishing sector, has been in excess of $2 million in the 4 years that our project has been up and running. They provide their knowledge, their skills, their boats, and their expertise to assist us with the project. And without them, we would never have gotten to where we are now. Excitingly, we are doing more work with the tourism sector, in addition to the recreational fishing sector in coming years. So in many ways, we're going to provide a bridge between some of the most important partnerships that exist for the management, recreational and commercial use of Corner Inlet. Anyone interested in coming and assisting us, my contact details are provided there. I do have a video, but owing to technological constraints, I won't be able to show that to you today. I very much encourage you to get in touch, and at this point in the presentation, I'd open up for any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. That is really, really incredible stuff, and it's wild to see the diversity of what falls under the Landcare ambit, so to speak, in terms of projects. So thank you so much for that presentation. Now we're just going to move into some questions, and we've had a couple come through. Please don't hesitate to ask some now, and I'll do my best to entertain as many as possible. Now for the first question, Jeff would like to know how blue carbon sequestration compares to green or brown, as in soil carbon sequestration.
Look, Jeff, that's a fantastic question. And I suppose I am in a privileged position where I've looked at carbon sequestration from all perspectives. Obviously, there's key differences between the two. And one of the ones I hit on was permanence. So key thing I would say is, with respect to seagrass, we do get a greater longevity in terms of how long we offset carbon. By the same token, it does take a lot longer to get to the point where it is sequestering high levels of carbon as well. So that 128 tonne figure, that's for an established meadow that could be many hundreds, if not thousands of years. The tonnages that you'll get off a meadow that you've recently replanted will be well below a couple of tonnes for each hectare that's restored until it's established. Then you get to a stage of about 20 years and it starts to go off the charts. The other thing I'd point out is you get an amazingly large amount of stacked benefits as well. So over and above the carbon, there's the biodiversity and the commercial fishery benefit. So there's still a heck of a lot of work to understand the baseline of this as well. So it's less mature, it's not as quick, but it's probably 3 times more exciting than brown and green carbon.
Excellent, thank you. Now we have another question come through from Nick, and Nick would like to know, are you able to control the ongoing predation of the seagrass by sea urchins?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That's a fantastic question. The short answer is yes. A large body of work has been done by Parks Victoria and the University of Melbourne. So some urchins are commercially harvested, whereas the majority are hit with a hammer and destroyed to keep them under wraps. There is still a large presence of urchins in Corner Inlet, but they're not at the explosive population levels that we saw during 2017 through 18. And it was the commercial fishers themselves who first saw them. There are commercial licenses for the collection and indeed sale of urchins. So there's an opportunity there, I guess, in both a commercial sense, but also an environmental one. So definitely keeping on top of that, yes.
And we have another question, which is one that I think you partially began to answer, which is where do you get your funding from?
Yes, so we've been very lucky in terms of attracting funding under the Department of Environment's Biodiversity On-Ground Action Program was the original pilot that launched this. And since then, we've received funding under the National Landcare Program, Smart Farms grants. We've received 3 of those with respect to this project. And most recently, we picked up funding under the Fish Habitat Restoration Program, which is also a federal funding program. So we're very indebted to our government funders for getting us as far as we have. We are reaching a scale upwards of $600,000 worth of funding to this point.
Thank you. Now, because that video was unable to be played, we do have a little bit of extra time. So if it's okay with you, Scott, I think I'll continue to badger you with questions that are coming through until we run out of time. We have another question here from Claudia, who's asked, is there any ongoing work that needs to be done to maintain the reestablished seagrass beds?
That's a really good question, Claudia. I would say, short answer to that is yes. With respect to different areas, there will be variation within that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach with respect to restoration. So some areas you can set and forget. Others will need top-up plantings, much in the same way that you would with direct seeding. You come along, or if you put in tube stock, some of the trees die back, and you want to make sure that some areas which have thinned out have a suitable amount in them, you would come back and do that there. So I would say it depends on which area we're looking at, but yes, the technique is developed as such that you would have to come back and do additional plantings. And particularly with the scuba-based approach as well, there may need to be top-up plantings in areas which perhaps weren't as suitable for seagrass restoration as others. So yes.
And a question from Helen here. Can you seed bank or store seagrass seeds like other land plants to help with years where you don't get any seeding events?
Very much a species dependent question. We've found, based on the academic work done in Western Australia, that particularly with Posidonia australis, the sooner you get those drop seedlings out into the ocean, the better. If we compare that with the species such as Zostra, that can and must be held onto for a period of months. So it really, in the specific case of Posidonia, ideally you would have it out, dropped and back in as soon as you can. They're quite temperamental. So after they've expended their energy to grow, if they get to a certain length in terms of the seedling growth, they'll die when they're put back into the inlet. So the sooner the better.
Excellent. All right. I think we've only got 1 or 2 more that I'll ask you, and then I'll free you from this barrage of questions. It's beautiful to see how much fascination there is with this project. It's so interesting. We have Michael here asking a question: what percentage of seeds are estimated to successfully establish naturally versus being collected and planted out?
We do get asked that question quite a lot, Michael. I think of the 157,000 seeds that were planted, we're looking at less than 1%, a factor of 0.2%, in fact. Comparatively, what we're seeing a lot of with respect to the amount of seed that drop out, there's been no estimates given as to how much actually forms on Corner Inlet. What we have seen is prevailing wind conditions have changed and large amounts of seed end up heading out to Bass Strait. So if you get above 6 to 8 meters of depth, it's not an ideal growing condition for the seagrass and it will die. So in many ways, our intervention is much like seed that perhaps may drop off an acacia or a gum tree that gets blown away. So I don't have a scope as to what natural recruitment would be. However, we know that there's been losses of up to 25% of seagrass meadows. Compare 2000 and sorry, if we could compare 1970s to 2015, we've lost about 25%. So the natural cycle needs a helping hand is probably the underlying message.
All right, and the last question for you today, Scott, comes from Claudia, and she would like to know, what did you find as most important in terms of the aspects of the site that influenced the success? Was it depth or how protected the site was naturally?
I'll talk to that question not just from our own experience, but the growing body of seagrass restoration literature globally. It comes down to water clarity. If you were to place areas on a site right near the estuary for a particularly muddy river, and by the same token, tidal movement, those two have been the greatest determinants for us. If you are in an area of high energy, you'll lose your seedling. And by the same token, from the international literature, if you were to place your site close to the mouth of a river where sediment is a major concern, that will also have some major bearing upon the efficacy of your restoration effort. So there are 1,000,001 other variables in terms of ocean temperature, access and use by other groups. But if I was to pinpoint two, I would say degree of tidal movement and sedimentation.
Amazing. Thank you, Scott. I think that will conclude this session for today. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. And I think I can say with a level of confidence I never thought I would, seagrass is kind of sexy.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we'll be back in about 5 minutes with our next presenters. So please tune in then to catch that final presentation in the Community Partnerships stream today. See you all then.